This is Vice News Tonight. I'm Krishna Andavolu. Tonight, we're shaking things up. We have a special hour-long episode about the future of the Republican Party. The view from D.C. is simple. The party is themed, and that theme is Trump. We saw that this week with Liz Cheney's demotion from Republican leadership. But the view from D.C. is also limited. Almost 75 million people voted for former President Trump in 2020, and not a lot of them live in Washington. So truly understanding the future requires a road trip. That's why Michael Moynihan went to Texas, which, like a Republican buffet, has every possible type of conservative. And he went with open ears, but a critical eye, to understand how voters feel about where we've been and where we're going.
Now Texas has gotten a bad reputation because of what happened in Dallas and Waco. And our corporations, they are corrupt, and our politicians are swindlers and loco. Now I love the USA and the other states, they're okay. Texas is the place I want to be, and I don't care if I ever go to Delaware anyway. So screw you, we're from Texas. Screw you, we're from Texas. Screw you. We're from Texas. We're from Texas. Screw you.
So while the rest of America is locked down and still swaddled in masks, Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott has essentially declared the coronavirus crisis over and has opened up the state and dropped the state's mask mandate. So we figured we'd go to a place that is known for sober reflection on public health policy and rule following, South Padre Island during spring break.
It's spring break! Here we go, here we go. Give it up for number 4.
After a day observing various cringe-inducing and probably super-spreading events on South Padre Island, we stumbled upon the boozy nerve center of the local MAGA set, Lobo Del Mar, a restaurant owned and operated by the staunchly conservative Bunton family. When you come into this restaurant, I mean, the first thing you notice is it's a pretty political establishment in a way. Right?
It is.
You wear it on your sleeve.
We do. We don't hide behind it. We're proud to support, our President Trump. Ever since our first Trump rally, the conservative groups that are a little bit shy to come out, they've jumped out. And our family's glad to support that,
Yeah.
We started supporting him in 2015 when he started running in Washington.
You were early adopters.
This is the first time we ever voted.
So nobody in the family had ever voted?
We never got involved politically until the 2016 election. They were doing the debates at that time against the other Republicans. And when he came on stage, I remember, a bunch of the family got together and we're like, wow. And we just jumped on the train. He was a human. He was us. He was a businessman. He was a commercial fisherman. He was an electrician. He talked like American.
Was there one issue that said, oh God, this has been destroying this country for a long time and nobody in Washington cares about it?
Multiple issues.
What was the biggest one?
The biggest one is making America first. It seems in the last couple of years, America they want us to apologize for being prideful about being American. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud to have my dad being from Texas. Proud for Donald Trump being our president.
Pride is a big thing.
It's good. That side of pride is good to me. I think it's good to be proud.
You should have a pride parade.
No.
Any criticisms of the president?
No.
Nothing.
I don't think so.
4 years.
4 years. I don't think I ever came against
a single thing.
I don't think so.
Oh dear. It's a bit cultish, isn't it?
It's not cultish. The things I disagree with, they're things that, he's human. So maybe we don't see eye to eye on all the things, but the common core thing that he was running on, I believed in.
Is there anything you've changed your mind about in the past 4 years? Any belief that you've had that you changed your mind about?
Yes, I think it's much more swampy than it was initially thought it was going to be swampy. And I think a lot of it came from his side, his party.
You're kind of saying in a way that the Republicans were actually worse than you thought that they were.
But they should have jumped on the Trump train, and they didn't. And I think it's going to affect them. I think it's going to affect them in the midterms coming up, and I think it's going to affect some of them on re-election in 2024. I hope it does. I hope they get voted out.
But is the Trump train running out of steam?
I don't think so. I'm still pumped for him. Whatever capacity he can do to keep his vision going, I'm behind it 100%. I don't know what that vision is. 78 million people that voted for him. We're being quiet, going to work, and watching, see what happens, and see what President Trump is going to do next. And I hope he understands that. We're watching, we're waiting.
So now that Trump's gone, who's your guy?
I don't know if he's totally gone.
It's not over. God is in control. He is not done with Donald Trump.
Do you believe that he lost?
No, I believe that the elections were absolutely rigged.
I've never seen a president have to go through the crap himself.
Donald Trump doesn't run in 2024. Who would you want to be the Republican Party nominee?
If it's not Donald Trump, it's going to be one of the Trumps.
What I would like to see is Trump run for the House of Representatives from Florida in 2022 and get elected. And if the Republicans can take over Congress, then they can vote for him to be Speaker of the House. And then he can impeach Harris and Biden and get him thrown out, and then he becomes the president again. And we've got him for 2 years.
That is the most convoluted thing I've ever heard in my life. You don't see a Republican Party without Donald Trump.
I don't. I cannot see any other Republican than a Trump running for president.
With an influx of new, disproportionately liberal residents and polling data showing Trump and Biden neck and neck, Democrats saw the long-held dream of flipping Texas inching closer to reality. But a largely unnoticed phenomenon would help derail that dream. Voters living along Texas's southern border were drifting rightward. So we're driving into Starr County, Texas, and South Texas. About 2 miles to our left is the border with Mexico. And Starr County is the most Hispanic county in America. 97% of its residents are Hispanic. And curiously enough, Donald Trump lost this county in 2016 by a wide margin. And he lost it again in 2020, but by only 5 percentage points. So we came here to try to figure out what happened in those intervening 4 years to make Tejano residents of this county turn to Trump. Driving into Starr County, we noticed a huge number of law enforcement vehicles along the highway. And that's Department of Public Safety. Going to the left here. Oh, they're pulling that car apart, right? Just 100 yards from the Rio Grande, the river separating the U.S. and Mexico, we met up with Ross Barrera, the GOP chair of Starr County.
Go this way to the river.
And we're driving up here, and every 10 feet there's a state trooper on the side of the road.
Yeah, they say there's more state troopers than scam phone calls that you get. It's called Operation Lone Star that Governor Abbott started about 2 months ago. And it's due to the surge that Border Patrol agents are now becoming processing officers instead of being security. So the DPS come over and they do the work that the Border Patrol cannot do on the highways. And they catch people with drugs, human trafficking, and so forth. So this is it.
What's the distance across here?
I would say it's about maybe 70 yards.
What is the kind of tenor down here when it comes to, the border?
As a Texan, a lot of Hispanics from here, they don't call themselves Hispanics.
Tejano.
Tejano means...
What's the difference?
The difference is that we can trace our roots to Texas, even before Texas was Texas. You know how the old saying that we didn't cross the border crossed us? And you got Tejano Democrats and Tejano liberals and Tejano conservatives. However, there's people that want to keep you in line saying, if you vote for a Republican, they're using you as a token. Trump doesn't like minorities. I mean, all the liberal lingo that you see on TV, people repeat it. And I'm like, no.
So the idea is that if you have heritage from over here, then you should have a certain set of political beliefs.
You're supposed to vote Democrat. Now, if somebody runs as a Republican or announces, Even your fellow friends and family members, they'll say, don't you remember where you're from? And they're trying to put you down, just like calling a black person Uncle Tom.
Stark County isn't just 97% Hispanic, but it's also among the poorest counties in the country. Over 50% of residents here live below the poverty line. Anita Barrientos and Joel Garza are both longtime residents.
When did you become a Republican?
2016. I got so mad at everything that was going on.
Was the issue that motivated you immigration?
Yes. I lived 50 feet from the shoulder of the expressway. One night, I got so scared, I heard a stampede. I thought it was horses. There were illegal aliens invading our country. I don't know how many times I've called DHS in the past 5 years. I've called at least 200 times. One time I was going from one building to the other. I heard 17 consecutive shots, high-powered weapon fired. I froze seeing those children walking. It was a cartel fighting. At night, you can hear the bombs. You can hear the action. And if this doesn't scare people in my community, I don't know what is going to scare them till they have them on their front door. It's sad, but this is a reality. We're living here in the county of Stark, and you need to hear us in Washington.
Did you both vote for Donald Trump in 2016?
I did.
You did?
Oh, yes.
You did. And I assume both in 2020 too, right?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Donald Trump is, in the view of a lot of people, undeniably racist.
I never saw him as a racist. The media is responsible for taking it totally out of context, and they beat it to death, on and on and on.
Tell me about the interaction, your first kind of media interaction with Donald Trump that you said, okay, I think I might be on this guy's side.
Once he said, you're going to work for a living. I said, it's about time someone speaks that language. Down here, we need jobs, because I've seen my students getting involved with the cartels, ended up being murdered. And I don't want to see that no more.
You think that if the border situation is not solved or greatly reduced, the traffic is reduced over the next 4 years, that would
We're going to be in a big mess.
And it would put a Trump-led candidate in a better position.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
On one issue, Republicans are largely united. The federal government, they say, must do more to prevent the flow of undocumented immigration. And shortly after Biden took office, the number of migrants reaching the U.S. border surged, with apprehensions reaching their highest level in 15 years. The administration was caught flat-footed. And according to a recent Quinnipiac poll, voters gave Biden his lowest marks on his handling of the border crisis. Republicans saw political opportunity.
All of us today witnessed the Biden cages.
Local journalist Dina Garcia Pena, who publishes a weekly bilingual newspaper in Stark County, has watched political loyalties shift amongst South Texas Tejanos. Hillary Clinton wins by a pretty wide margin in 2016. Joe Biden wins in 2020, but by a considerably smaller margin. Considerably smaller.
Absolutely.
What happened?
It wasn't instantaneous because we've always had a flow of undocumented immigrants. The difference is when a year and a half ago we started to see 200, 300 undocumented immigrants coming in.
At a time?
At a time. And to some degree, it feels like an invasion.
And your parents were immigrants?
Absolutely. And a lot of the people along the border, that's our story. Either the border crossed us or we came in as immigrants.
And were your parents documented?
Actually, my mom was documented. She was a resident, but my dad came in as an undocumented immigrant.
So that is something that's in your family.
Absolutely.
I mean, an undocumented immigrant is your father.
Right. It's not like I'm anti-immigration, but it is hard to understand 300 people in your backyard.
The border problem is a cartel problem, too.
It is absolutely a cartel problem because the cartels are no longer worried about drugs as they are about human smuggling.
In an incredibly brutal way, too.
Absolutely. If you stay in Roma any given night, you're going to hear the gun battles. And it's not hurting Washington. It's hurting us here locally. We just no longer feel safe.
I mean, that would just broadly explain any electoral shift anywhere.
Absolutely. My family's lived in Stark County since 1999. We left water out for undocumented immigrants. We lent out a phone whenever they needed to talk to somebody. We were always very pro-immigrants, and we still are. The reality is you don't know who's coming in.
The point that Donald Trump made.
And it is a point. It does pull at your heartstrings to see kids by themselves separated from parents.
The child separation policy was obviously kind of a big black eye for the Trump administration. Here in Stark County, that didn't create more Joe Biden voters.
I think the deal breaker here had nothing to do with immigration. I mean, there is a little bit of it, but the deal breaker here was the fracking and the renewable energy versus petroleum and oil industry. Because in Stark County, our families that are working class families and are doing well for themselves are pipeline workers. And so when Joe Biden started to say this during one of the debates, banning fracking and changing policies and going towards renewables, that was a deal breaker. And no matter what you tried to tell them after that, there was no turning back.
And people think that jobs are scarce here. We don't need more people coming in and competing for those jobs at maybe a lower wage.
Absolutely.
And obviously, the immigration issue, the way Donald Trump spoke about immigration when he uses Mexicans as this kind of demonic force, wasn't enough to overwhelm them and say, I can't vote for a guy who thinks things like that.
No, because at the end of the day, you want to put food on the table.
You don't give a shit if the guy's gruff and...
It's about taking care of your family. In Stark County, it was a very quiet revolt.
They're quiet Trump supporters.
They were quiet. They were just, we're not going to say anything, but we're going to go out and vote. And that is to me, that's the strongest voter. Because that means you have messed up so badly that they're not even willing to have a conversation.
I'm gonna leave Dayton, Texas.
It was President Richard Nixon who coined the term silent majority. In 2020, pollsters debated something similar, the existence of the quiet Trump voter, someone not ferociously MAGA and not willing to admit their political allegiances to pollsters. And while college campuses remain overwhelmingly liberal spaces, the emergence of the so-called cancel culture debate has given the Republican Party a culture war opening amongst young voters. Trump doesn't bother you as a candidate or as a politician?
I mean, I think he says what everybody's thinking. So that's why I liked the dude.
I think he's an ass of a person, an absolute douchebag. But I think when it's a douchebag with good policies versus someone with dementia, is definitely much more of a supporter of Trump.
I thought it was interesting that he spoke his mind instead of trying to fit into this bubble of political correctness.
What is the one issue you would say kind of animates you politically?
Freedom. I feel like in a lot of ways, America's losing its freedom, especially with freedom of speech. There's a lot of censoring going on.
Even at a Baptist, leaning right university in Central Texas, I do not feel comfortable.
American culture is like, you're this or you're this. You're right or you're wrong.
And I think it's something that's purposely done by the political leaders and the elite. They try to make these issues as controversial to keep everyone divided. It's divide and conquer.
Disappointed in Republicans at all?
I think everyone is disappointed in politics.
Not specifically Republicans, just in politics.
I would say both parties.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed in both parties.
The disappointment in both parties is reflected in the vanishingly small percentage of Americans who think Congress is doing a good job. And while Donald Trump registered historically low approval ratings during his presidency, amongst college students, only 18% of those polled in 2020 said they'd vote for him. Grant Rommel is the president of the University of Texas Austin College Republicans, and he has the unenviable task of, in the age of Trump, selling conservative ideas to an overwhelmingly liberal campus. When people come to you, are the debates mostly about Donald Trump? Because I'm sure he's not a terribly popular person on this campus.
No, he's obviously not.
Do you defend him?
It depends on the policy.
Do you defend him as a person?
I disagree with a lot of his rhetoric, but I think a lot of people see him as a bulwark against the radicalization that we've seen in the Democratic Party over the past 10 to 12 years. Social policies, I think he did a good job. He was, very vocal against, things such as critical race theory, especially towards the end of his presidency. I think critical race theory and identity politics have been one of the most toxic things for the country, probably in the past 50 years.
Is that one of your motivating issues?
For when I vote for president? Yeah. Look at what we saw over the summer last year. I mean, we saw some of the worst rioting, some of the worst looting we've seen in the country's history. It was billions of dollars in property damage. People lost their lives. We saw parts of cities burned to the ground. We saw occupational zones in Portland and Seattle. That's not what we need to be, first of all, as a country, but also as a party.
Are most of the people that you know that are young conservatives motivated by culture war politics?
I think a lot of them are. That's where we know we can make the most impact. And, you know, I think this is something Andrew Breitbart used to say, was that culture is always upstream of politics. So whatever happens in the culture is eventually going to lead into the political realms. You know, we're going to start seeing speech codes like they have in Canada. We're going to start seeing speech codes that prohibit me from expressing opinions or dissenting opinions or anything like that. And that's a terrifying thing. I mean, we see that
And Donald Trump spoke to that.
Yes.
Despite Trump's many moral failings, Christians supported him in 2020 just as overwhelmingly as previous Republican candidates. But the percentage of Americans who identify as Christian has been declining for years. Jamin Roller is a minister at Citizens Church in the Dallas suburb of Plano.
The Bible says our greatest problem is not outside of us, it's in us. It's our hearts. We primarily have a sin problem and we need a Savior. We need a Lord. We need someone who can do for us what we can't do for ourselves. And Jesus is that.
I mean, you're a Christian, so you believe in forgiveness.
Yes.
You going to forgive me for this question?
Of course. Well, ask it.
Okay. Did you vote for Donald Trump?
I do forgive you. Answering that kind of question in this kind of forum does not give me the space I need to explain the heart behind it.
Do you think it would be hard to answer this question if I said, did you vote for George W. Bush?
It would not be as hard.
Do you consider yourself a conservative?
For sure, theologically conservative. And then, you know, if we were to just go kind of point for point on the topics, I definitely would lean politically conservative.
Do you consider yourself a Republican?
No.
But not a Democrat either?
Not a Democrat.
Free of party affiliation?
Yeah. And I just think it's a little uncharitable and unfair that we try to follow people's words or values or morals and then immediately fit them or situate them into one camp or the other. And people are complex. Is there something wrong with someone supporting a political candidate? No. Is there something wrong about platforming a politician in the space where God already occupies that platform? Yes.
That offends you?
Yes. One of the things I think that some Christians are guilty of is outsourcing to politicians what God has called us to be as people, and believe that because we voted a value that we think God would support, that the work is done.
The future of the party, let's think about that for a second. Because the Republican Party was the natural home, obviously, for, you know, a long time for many, if not most, Christians. The party has gone through a transformation. It's remaking itself to a party kind of in the image of Donald Trump, in the image of populism, in the image of nationalism, and in some cases, Christian nationalism. Do you worry that your natural political home is going to permanently be that?
If we are trying to carry out the ethics of Jesus, we should expect to be politically homeless. I just believe that. We should expect to be politically homeless. Not that we don't vote, not that we don't participate. My worry is that Christians who know Jesus, love Jesus, are so meaning-starved that they believe that the hope for their life and what the values of their life are tied up in the campaigns of mere mortals and mere imperfect people.
So Christianity has been captured by politics?
Some. We live in a country that, from its very inception, there is this conflation of spiritual language with national language. So if you go back to the founders, some of those guys were Christians, some of those guys were not, but they're using language about America like it's the last great hope of the world, you know, promised land language, and that's...
The shining city on the hill.
Absolutely. Yeah. Immediately a flag should go up, and we should be able to differentiate between our relationship to a nation versus our relationship to God, our relationship to Jesus.
The concept of Christian nationalism is not only not something that's new, but it's something that seems to be pretty prominent these days.
Yes. Where I grew cautious and still am are people who would look and say that the hope of the church, the future of the church, is in this man's hands who is in the Oval Office. And that's not true. The hope of the church, the future of the church, is in the hands of Jesus, who is seated at the right hand of God.
And we need to be reminded that this life is about so much more than just our little world, but how God has changed us and deployed us into our world to show Him into the world.
While Republicans lost the House, Senate, and the executive branch in 2020, they maintain a roughly 2-to-1 electoral advantage at the state level. In Texas, they've maintained control over the House, Senate, and governor's mansion for almost 20 years. James White is a state assemblyman representing District 19, a rare African-American Republican in East Texas. White is wildly popular. He beat his last opponent in a landslide, with over 80% of the vote.
Trump in 2016 reminded me a lot of myself. Nobody thought I could win. Nobody thought Trump could win. And I would say that I was a disruptive force.
Why are you a Republican?
Well, values, okay? I think the Judeo-Christian culture, it's embedded in our Constitution, in our governance, the way we approach it. I think it has benefited us.
You're a black Republican. How many times have you turned the television on and seen the presence of white nationalists?
Well, there's no doubt that media elites are liberals.
Did he lose?
Look, we count the votes, and Biden had the most electoral votes in the Electoral College, and thus he wins the election, and he's our duly elected president, okay?
Why do so many people in this state find that sentence so hard to say?
It is what it is.
Move on.
Okay. I don't say move on. We're not moving on here in the Texas legislature. We're doing election reform.
As a response to the 2020 election?
We do election reform all the time, but definitely that's a concern back home. So we're doing election reform. So why did he lose? Those questions remain to be answered because, again, this is a Republican president, incumbent president, that garnered more votes than any Republican president incumbent in the history of this country.
But because of who he was, he also motivated more people to come out and vote for the other guy.
That's probably so. And look, so we had a small group of vocal Republicans, that had a concern with the president. And I think it's because he was successful in reaching working class voters. Maybe some were shaken by his approach, but that's what I think we've been lacking in the Republican Party.
You needed a radical shakeup in some way.
I think we did. What's wrong with competing for working class people? These are salt of the earth people. They're people like in my district. They wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 they're crawling in a log truck and driving for 10 or 12 hours. They're nurses, they're teachers, they're pastors. These are the people that really make the country work.
Were they previously ignored by the party?
I think they were. They were ignored by the party and taken for granted by other parties.
So you're happy with the direction the party's going, just in general?
In general, yes. Donald Trump has had a searing, enduring impact on people that have had very tough challenges in their life. Trump has had his ups and downs in marriage and in business, and somehow they can connect with that. He has not only connected people so much on policy, but in their gut.
But will the Trump era outlast Donald Trump?
I think the culture of it, the underpinnings of it, absolutely.
And within the party too?
Yes, and I think the party will be better for it.
Donald Trump speaks the language of this new Republican Party. It's not a party that speaks the language of lower taxes and lower government spending. It is a culture war party, and it is a party that believes free speech is under threat, that genders are under threat. Everything that you see in Northeast liberal culture is the stuff that they hate. So which direction will the Republican Party go? Well, the motivated people here in Texas are Donald Trump voters. The people sitting on the fence, not so much. If you think that the George W. Bush compassionate conservatism is going to make a comeback in Texas anytime soon, you're probably mistaken.
With the 2022 midterms looming and fears of a federal government lurching to the left, local Republican activists aren't merely licking their wounds. They're spoiling for the next fight. The Rooftop Republicans is a group of MAGA faithful who meet weekly at a Mexican restaurant in College Station, Texas.
The focus of this group is to concentrate on working from the school board up to the presidency and bringing true conservatism to bear.
We are hardcore conservatives.
Both coasts look at us as a bunch of backwoods cretin, and we're not. He's a retired judge. I've got a PhD. There are various other people around here who are educated, intelligent, been a lot of places, done a lot of things, and we're tired of being laughed at. You look at the stuff that comes out of Hollywood, and you don't see a central white family or even a minor mixed family. There's 3 queers, 2 lesbians, 13 Martians, and a bunch of...
I've missed this film, but I'm sure it's on Netflix.
That's the central idea of who we are.
So you feel condescended to by the media and just by the culture in general?
Yeah, for years, decades.
Let me do a little experiment here. Give me a sentence. How you feel the media views you.
They think we can't think for ourselves and we need to be told what to do.
And they're laughing all the way to the bank.
Making money off of being condescending to you.
We're the competition, and they have to shut us down through any means possible to promote their agenda.
What is their agenda, do you think?
Communism.
I want to just be specific on that. Not liberalism, not social democracy.
Not liberalism with progressivism. Progressivism is just another word for communism, and that's what's taken over that part of the world.
Like liberalism in the sense of like Kennedy-style liberalism versus Swedish-style social democracy versus Soviet-style communism. I mean,
the manifesto with what they're doing, it's the same.
The Communist Manifesto.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Is that a pretty uniform view here?
Yeah.
One of their tactics is divide and conquer. And Marxists, they use language, they use race, they use economics, they use anything that they can find that puts a drive away between us.
My son is leaning towards liberal.
How old is he?
26. And when he and I talk about issues and really dive down into them, we agree on almost everything.
You do?
The concern about the elitists versus the people.
You see the enemy as the same thing. What is it that politically divides you and your son?
I think that he's listening more to mainstream media, believing the narrative that we are racist. You know, you're talking about Bernie Sanders, we're talking about unions, we're talking about Trump. You know, what is it about him? And it all boils down to we the people. They don't want to be dismissed. And they want a say-so in what's going on.
On the union issue, by the way, that's I think one issue where I've seen Republicans kind of move a little bit. I mean, the other day, Marco Rubio coming out pretty strongly against Amazon. You would never, ever, in 40 years of me being watching this stuff, see a Republican come out strongly in favor of a brand new union forming against a company like Amazon.
I think it's more about justice. He wants to push that crap on the rest of us, but he doesn't want it in his company.
Jeff Bezos has politics. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. And Marco Rubio is putting the idea about the media and about the elites above a probably typical disdain or distrust of unions.
At least the stories I've read from the people in those Amazon warehouses, it's like working in a Ford factory in 1910. They beat the hell out of you, tied you to the machine, and said you're going to drop dead on the spot. That's what's happening. And that's what they're supporting is the people going back against management, saying this thing's out of control, we got to get it back to where we can live here.
People used to paint Republicans as the parties of the elite, of the wealthy, of the country club class, the Bushes, Now, Republicans using the language of the working class, of unions and the purpose of them.
Republicans are not. Donald Trump is.
Donald Trump is. Donald Trump, I say Republicans because he is the head of the Republican Party right now, right? You sound pretty left-wing sometimes, right? But if you went back to sort of 2000, when there was the anti-WTO protests in '99 in Seattle, it's a kind of a populist thing that overlaps between left and right.
Well, that's why this isn't about Democrat or Republican or anything like that. It's about the people versus the elites.
Do Republicans care about spending anymore? A $1.9 trillion spending bill, the biggest in American history adjusted for inflation? Does it bother you guys? I mean, that's kind of to a degree. I finally hear a little bit of dissent here.
Yeah. Well, I would say dissent. He spends money freely, and I'm okay with that, on the things that matter. So defense spending, infrastructure, border control, border security, and getting rid of the things that are sucking sounds.
So that's what animates you now: smaller government, less spending, lower taxes. Do you think that there's a likelihood of getting a sort of across-the-board kind of Trump, Congress of Republicans?
Yes.
So this is just the beginning of the battle to you guys?
Absolutely. Correct.
Who are the elites that need to be knocked off?
Mitt Romney, Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell.
Schumer.
Somebody finally named a Democrat. Schumer. Those are all Republicans.
Anyone who's been up there for more than 10 years is corrupt.
Sometimes you've got to draw that line in the sand. The Republican elite had never drawn that line.
No.
We keep going over, the Democrats keep pulling left. Now's the time that people need to stand up for our Constitution. We're losing our rights.
So you don't see any room for compromise in the
Not anymore. I mean, we have got to stand up. We have compromised
This group is
today.
about no compromise politics.
It's an unsurprising sentiment. Since leaving office, Donald Trump has unloaded on fellow Republicans, like Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney, with a frequency and ferocity he typically reserves for Democrats. But as the battle for the soul of the Republican Party rages, the Biden administration has laid the groundwork for a sweeping progressive policy agenda, leading some Republicans to wonder if the party can stop squabbling long enough to effectively oppose it. After a few weeks residing in the alternate MAGA universe, I returned to the political reality of Washington, D.C., where Democrats are united and Republicans rudderless. I wanted to talk to one of Congress's most prominent anti-Trump conservatives, Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who was one of only 10 Republicans to support Trump's second impeachment. You have a long history here with the party. How is it that you're the fake Republican now? What is it that, did you expect this to happen, where you say, oh, this is an aberration. It's gonna be Trump and then he's gonna be gone. It doesn't seem to be going away.
It's still relatively early. We're 3 months. I think you're gonna have to look in the mirror of a 1 or 2 years past to see where it goes. But yeah, I mean, the ultimate joke is that somehow I'm a rhino. Now you have folks that used to be huge on free trade. Now they love China tariffs. All of a sudden now they're against being in Afghanistan. They were for it, and everything now is not based on anything of principle. It's all based on a culture war, and it's all based on what does Donald Trump say, or whoever he bestows his love upon. What do they say? And then that's what a Republican. That shifts every friggin' day.
What was it about Donald Trump that made people line up behind him, and not only line up behind him because it's a party fealty, they said, we're going to bet on our principles for this guy?
So I think it's the desire to be around power, and then the complete brokenness of Donald Trump in terms of his ability to be like a normal man and, demand 100% loyalty.
I mean, it's a sort of mafia thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's like you fear. You sit around like, oh man, if I do something, he's going to tweet up until recently, or he's going to turn against me. And he does bring a lot of power with him. The reality, 74 million people voted for Donald Trump, but they were outnumbered. They weren't disenfranchised.
How does that make you feel when you know that 75 million people voted for the man who you believe to be the cancer on the Republican Party?
Up until Election Day, even some Republicans maybe were like, well, I don't like the way he talks, but just I'm going to vote based on policy. I totally get it. But where I break ranks, particularly, and where I'm still very confused, is after Election Day on. So after Election Day, this idea of a stolen election, it's just not true.
And I will tell you, I talked to so many people that say, no, it was stolen. And I can throw the facts out there that I want, and they just refuse to believe it. Why? Probably because it's more comfortable to not. You're picking a side now. And then, of course, the insurrection. I had somebody recently tell me in my district that it couldn't have been Republicans that did that because Republicans don't destroy things. They did destroy things. They went into that Capitol, which we used to hold sacred, and now all of a sudden, for some reason, it's just like a park bench we can all just go run through. It's insane.
People have been lied to by too many for too long. So here's the truth. Joe Biden won this election. The effort will fail, and everybody knows it. For some out there, this isn't about making a statement for the betterment of our country. It's about avoiding the pain of leveling with the people and telling them the truth. The emperor has no clothes.
I went down, I took my 1 or 2 minutes because I was furious. I had watched Matt Gaetz and others on the floor say the exact same BS that they were gonna say prior to the insurrection. The exact same crap. And I went down, I'm like, have you learned nothing? Like, this is garbage. You know, Kevin McCarthy goes down and says, Trump bears 100% responsibility for this, and a week later, kind of responsibility, and now it's none. Like, this is insane. And if we're gonna normalize what happened here, all the institutions of government will fall, and it is literally that dramatic. I honestly think, and I'm not even saying this in any kind of a jest, if like China nuked California, I think a lot of Republicans would say, good, now we can win the next presidential election. Like, I think we have become so tribalized that we see the other party now as the enemy.
I mean, so if there's no principle left in the party, what is a party at that point?
Well, that's the whole point. Populism is the antithesis of a party. A party was created for not populism, to have centering principles. So I don't know.
How do you take the party back when it seems to be so captured by one man?
I think it's a couple things. First off, you just have to commit to telling the truth. You have to commit to not peddling in conspiracy and fear. And I think a big thing is, as an individual, but also as a party, eventually, you have to quit trying to use fear to compel votes. Problem is, after about 5 election cycles of fear the other side, fear the future, fear this, it destroys the country. And that's what we're starting to see.